Okay, we are now recording. All right, so I'm going to go full screen here on the doc. So, as a quick recap, partially for retweeted video purposes, we've been discussing in the live hangouts and in the Google group about the fact that we have, I think, 9 homegrown currently specs, and we have 3/4. Actually, sorry, is it 4/5 JSRs, right? Java E JSRs that we layer on top of, and we have a bunch more new ones potentially. I'll scroll here, and a bunch more under discussion. Some of which will probably be added to MicroProfile 3. So one of the things that we've started thinking about is some potential perceptions. The first perception is how do we continue to grow the number of specifications, just showing that we're really addressing the need that developers have without being perceived as big, heavy, and complex. Right now, I think we, the folks on the call, all know that the number of specs don't necessarily imply complexity of a programming architecture or whatever, right? But still, there is a potential perception there. The second is, how do we attract new implementations without setting the bar too high? So right now, basically to say, hey, I'm MicroProfile 2.2 compliant means I have to implement all 8 specs, right? But look at this a year from now, it could be to say if I'm MicroProfile 3.x compliant, now I got to implement potentially 10, 15 specs, whatever, right, going on in the future. So we started to kind of see this as a potential problem. So I put this in the Growing Pains document, tried to list these. By the way, these may not be the only 2. There may be other pain points that people might want to specify as it relates to the number of specifications. So the other thing I did here is I kind of laid out where we are with specs, right? So this gives you an idea about the number of specs we have and the potential challenge. So the objectives, at least of this document, and this is a kind of a living, breathing document here, so we can make changes. This is just me laying down a bunch of thoughts, right? The first is the issues themselves, which points up to the issues above. Document the options that we have to address the issues. Again, this is just me doing a bunch of a brain dump in hopefully a somewhat organized manner, and then for us to select an option. The way I've parsed this is very specific. Maybe this isn't the best way, but it's ways for us to categorize. I use the word profiles. I know a MicroProfile profile doesn't make sense, right? But everyone kind of knows what EE profiles are, so I didn't want to come up with a new term in the context of this discussion. So the angle I took is, hey, what if we take a similar concept to EE profiles and try to organize things that way? Maybe there's other ways to categorize things. So, all right. If I'm going to go ahead and skip over some of these definitions around standalone specs and optional specs and stuff. A very quick overview of the options I've defined, and then we can go back and clarify them. One is just composition. It's just a bunch of specs, individual specs. We don't have a platform spec at all. That like a Java EE traditional full platform spec, right? It's much more like the example I used is internet RFCs, right? It's just a bunch of specs that people can write to. Specs can depend on other specs if needed, right? But still, there is no concept of categorization, right? I'm an implementation. I can say I support these specs. Option 2, we have a core, like we do today, and then just a bunch of independent specs that aren't a part of the core, right? Option 3 basically tries to define, actually, how do I, oh, that's an example. Option 3 says, okay, we have a core spec. If I'm in an implementation, I can just implement the core and call it a day. Or I can, we can define additional profiles, again, kind of like the web profile in EE. And I can optionally, as an implementation, support additional profiles. If I support a profile, I have to declare it, I have to implement all the specs in the profile if I want to say I'm profile compliant, right? And I also have to implement the core. So I have to implement the core plus optionally other profiles. Option 4 is a variant of that says, you know what, we don't have a core profile, we just have a bunch of profiles, right? They're all independent, and we could decide as an implementation which ones we want to support. By the way I've defined this is a spec can exist in more than one profile, right? This is not a hard rule, it's just a way to discuss it with the way I'm thinking may not be ideal. Last one is pretty much a Java EE variant, right? We have every spec is a part of the platform, and I can have independent profiles within the platform, right? Again, I think that's a nuance. It's how we want to present things outward. Maybe it'll make a difference when we start really drilling in on platform spec, but it's somewhat similar, right? So these are the 5 options. There might be 6 options. You may not like the way I've parsed this, which is perfectly okay. This is a brain dump of maybe how we go about and tackle this growing problem, what can be considered a growing pains problem. I'll pause and let other folks now kind of provide comments. Maybe we start with, like, is this approach of categorizing things the right way to go, or are we not at the point where we have this problem? Go.
I think we are at the point where we have this problem, and I think it could balloon even faster than we might imagine. Let's just say, for example, where for whatever reason people just wanted to make new specs in MicroProfile over anywhere else, right? Let's just say circumstances arose where, gosh, MicroProfile is the place where I want to do my work. The number of specs that we have could potentially increase dramatically under that situation. And then this problem that we're having now with the already existing specifications gets way more complicated because we're growing much more faster than we anticipated, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think this is a good conversation to have. I have 2 different thoughts on what – I love the way you put the options out with all the pictures and everything. That's remarkable. Thank you for putting that work in.
I like the colors too. Super cool.
Okay.
The consumption is easy.
I do want to say one thing about that. I apologize for interrupting, David. The way I've defined them are completely arbitrary, for example purposes only.
Totally understand. It's good for discussion, right? You got to be able to say, I like that one a little bit. I'd want to do it like this, right? So my first impression, and then I'll give everybody else the chance to talk. My first impression is if you flip to option 2, that's kind of where we are now. I like that. I would say that for where we're at now, that's how I would do things. But if you flip down to, I guess it's option 3. I think that could be a very good next step. And I wouldn't call them profiles, but what I could see being a realistic thing that happens for us is that we end up with something that is basically the MicroProfile core and the reactive extensions. And that's like one wrapped box of streams and messaging and stuff like that. And it could make for good marketing to be able to say, I've written my app against MicroProfile core with the reactive extensions. And, so it's not like we call it the web profile and this profile or the reactive profile. It's like core plus these extensions. So the extensions concept is basically becomes a shrink-wrapped box of other specs. So it's kind of like still having add-on specs, It's just you have an easy way to say these add-on specs, and we would want them to group together fairly well. So, it might be someday we have MicroProfile plus the reactive extensions and the NoSQL extensions or something like that, graph extensions, monitoring extensions, who knows? But it'd basically be like a little slightly bigger than one spec. It's a little shrink-wrapped box of specs. That seems like, well, just based upon what we have and why we're having this conversation, that seems like the most realistic outcome. Anyway,
and with this option, by the way, not everything has to be in a profile, right? Which is why I intentionally have that far right column.
Yeah, totally, exactly. So, like, I can see a situation where there is a very clear box for a specific set of extensions, or that would all want to get a label, and you have to say you support all of that extensions or not.
And I like this because John, you use profile, but I do have a problem with profile. We have been calling them components. We have been calling them specs, and it's confusing when newcomers come and do blogs, and we have a bunch of problems with our naming standards. I recommend we use extensions or something similar. Extensions instead of profile seems better and much more compliant when a coder says, I'm using this extension on the core. It's much better than just profile. So when I go into the document, which I haven't done, I just went into the first page before this call and added draft 01. I haven't destroyed it yet because I was waiting for this call. So I'm just saying this is what I'm going to do when I go in it.
So I have no problem changing profile to extensions after this call. Again, profile was a temporary.
Totally got it.
Right.
I have added nothing to your. I've added nothing of value to what you have there, other than the fact that a perhaps better name for the thing on top of the core. So
yeah, I'm just being blunt here, but if you can change it,
get the words in. So let's hit him.
Yeah, that can be changed with one action by John. So that's perfect.
We're still discussing, so it doesn't need to be changed yet.
Other feedback?
Yeah. So.
Sorry, Kevin. After you.
Okay. So one clarification with option 3, would core still be? I mean, is the implication that core is required?
The implication is that core is required, and option 4 removes that requirement. We don't really have a core.
Okay, so that's what I got from the comments, but I just wanted to clarify that for everyone on the call. Okay.
Someone else had a question before I go?
Yeah, my question was, are we all of one mind that a specification is sort of like an unsplittable atom, as it were? Because there was a use case with Helidon I saw where they wanted to deploy an environment where they didn't have CDI. So they, at one point, talked about having the support for the parts of config that didn't use CDI. And I wondered if, we've split things up very much by functional area, but I was interested in, I quite like the config approach where they had a base API, a sort of functional API, and then the CDI stuff that sat on top. And also, we've got things like Quarkus and Micronaut and things like that might not be able to support the same sort of CDI first approach that all the specs are currently. Do we want to keep this? MicroProfile is basically about CDI annotations. And then building on top of that, I wondered if it'd be more powerful to have a reactive sort of section in each specification to try to encourage the specifications to support a reactive part of them, rather than for it to be split off. Because I'm a bit slightly worried that it'll be kind of, there'll be lots of little scraps of spec, which is like the reactive part of spec, blah. And who's going to own that and deliver it? And I think it could look a bit messy.
So I'll comment on the CDI aspect. We've always been, since the foundation, CDI first, right? And if folks want to split things into multiple layers, like config did, that can be done. But we've always been we always have been a CDI first group.
I would also add, John, that the reason config did it was out of practical necessity, in that they needed a way to bootstrap things before the CDI container existed. That's the main reason why they have separate Java APIs.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's one way we could split things. And we could, the whole reactive thing is going to be a difficult discussion. Potentially. So that's another thing for us to kind of maybe talk about, because we have standalone specs right now that are reactive, but we're looking at making individual specs more reactive as well. So, so that's let's put a placeholder there. I think it's a very good observation, Gordon. Other thoughts around the organization of the specs? I just don't want to focus too much into a specific thing quite yet. Other thoughts around the categorization of things?
I guess from my perspective, I think, not wanting to dwell on the reactive side, but to be able to do something that's reactive, I think we need to, well, it would be beneficial to move away from an option 3 or option 3 kind of model that we have now to more an option 4, because there are a lot of things that are currently in a core platform that either are not going to be rewritten to be reactive at the core, or are going to take a very long time to be rewritten to be reactive at the core. So to create a reactive profile that builds on top of a core of things that aren't reactive is not going to sit well with the reactive community.
Yeah, but also you are assuming that we will decide on bringing reactive to the core. That has not been agreed, and I don't think that is necessary.
I wasn't talking about it being in the core. I'm saying if it becomes a separate reactive profile, and that we have the requirement that any profile, I know the name's going to change, depends on core, then that's going to build on a lot of things that are not reactive, and that is not going to go over with the reactive community.
I see, yeah. So, you know,
hold on.
Options. Go ahead, Bea.
So my gut reaction, no pun intended, there is that I worry about option 4 if there's nearly zero overlap between these profiles. It's just basically a bifurcation of the brand.
Yep.
And so I wouldn't ever want to see like MicroProfile mean you can speak Japanese or Spanish. But as long as you speak MicroProfile, you should be able to talk to each other. That is meaningless. You know what I mean? If I understand that it won't go over well with the reactive community, but then, okay, stop making stuff under the MicroProfile brand.
Or we can reevaluate what must be in core and maybe leave out a few things which we are considering now as core.
Yep, exactly, Rudy. That's what I was going to mention.
Yeah, I mean, I don't mind taking some things out of core, but I wouldn't want there to be no core.
Right.
Correct. Do we have anyone from the reactive community in this call or not? I do the test when there is no one to push that community and say, hey, we're talking about this, and it's not about compromising, it's about hearing all sides. And clearly this is not going to be decided today, but I wish we had one of Lightman.
Well, I know Clement's perspective, and that's basically his perspective on the situation, that if reactive is something that builds on the core specs, even if it gets reduced significantly from what's there now, that is going to be a problem, because most of those specs have non-reactive and blocking behavior inside them, which goes against the whole principle of reactive.
Well, but we cannot go the other way around. So sadly, do you see what I mean? We cannot accommodate one community and drop all the other ones. And
that's why I'm suggesting option 4, so that they can essentially have 2 parallel streams.
Yeah,
it would not work. It's too much work.
What does it mean to be in a job interview and someone saying, I have MicroProfile experience. Oh, not that one, the other one.
Correct. That is a freaking
And there's
massive.
no overlap there, right? And you put a job post out because you need someone in your team who develops MicroProfile, and they go, oh, not that one, the other one. And then you read a book, and it's not that MicroProfile, the other MicroProfile. What's the point of calling it MicroProfile?
Yeah, it's not even optional. It's not even scalable, so let's drop it because it's not going to work.
Anyway, what are your thoughts, Ken, about what, given that?
Well, I can tell you now, Red Hat's focus is going reactive. And if MicroProfile isn't going to be part of that, then we'll just do things on our own, unfortunately. We want to do things in the spec, but we are pushing more towards a reactive for everything model. And particularly with the release of Quarkus, that's what we're focusing on. So that's why we're kind of wanting a way to do reactive and non-blocking that doesn't sit on top of blocking things.
It may be that there's a middle way, because quite a lot of the specs in the main platform, say, like, for example, metrics could sit with reactive because it's sort of out of band. Things like config, there's no problem really with having config with
JWT.
Security, again, that's out of band in terms of it's not necessarily, synchronous in itself because it's a decorator. The REST client has a reactive extension. It's possible to have something in fault tolerance to kind of map between. We're going to have systems where we have subcomponents that are reactive talking to subcomponents which are not. So one could map the semantics to, for example, the bulkhead semantics to deal with that. Things like health check. Health check, I don't think that really is going to have to deal with a lot of back pressure issues. So it's not as black and white, perhaps. It may just be a case of it's a few inter-server specifications that we want to maybe make non-core, which isn't such a bad thing, because often in one application that's composed of microservices, quite often there isn't a mixture of different intercomponent connections. So for example, if you're using JAX-RS, you might not be using any other form of inter-service communication.
So I think Kevin said it earlier. Gordon said it again, and I mentioned it as I'm on board with it as well. We can take things out of what we currently consider core.
That's my recommendation.
Take them out, right? So is there anything, obviously the fault tolerance is a totally blocking concept. It's a problem caused by blocking, solved with the blocking spec, right? So I can totally see how that is like reactive in like every smell. And so maybe we just take that one out. It's not a core spec anymore.
It's not that relevant in a mesh environment, I've heard 2 or 3 people say.
Right. So maybe we take that out of core and say, there's the blocking profile. There's the block, we don't necessarily need to have a specific set of extensions for blocking. I think that would not be good marketing. No one would ever want that, but you can just leave it there. So we could have a core that has fewer blocking in it, but we can go through the list and figure out, does this spec actually have any blocking concepts in it? CDI is not a blocking, inherently not a blocking spec. It's just one piece of code calls another. It can happen as a response to an event. It's totally fine. CDI doesn't have a network face to it, so it's inherently not blocking or non-blocking.
So then,
apart from CDI events and listeners, but we can gloss over that.
Sure, but hold on. Config, that's injecting data into something that happens. That doesn't have to be a blocking versus non-blocking. JWT is a security concept of what comes in off the wire. How that happens is not blocking or blocking. So I see most of the stuff that we have in there is not anti-reactive except fault tolerance. And if there's another spec that is very blocking, let's just eject it from the core. What do people think about that?
+1. You know, this was.
What do other non-Tommy tribe people think about that?
Yeah.
I am ruthless. We in the operation in the architectural code we said we would remove the stuff.
Hold on. I didn't get what I wanted. What do other non-Tommy tribe people think about that?
Yeah. Well, okay. So I don't know that we are trying to decide the content of core profiles on this call, but I think the idea. Just a second. But I think the idea of being able to revisit the content of core, I think that is a valid concept. So I +1 on that, David.
Yeah, that was always the intent of the platform/core, is that what we have today isn't necessarily what we'll have tomorrow, right? I'm also curious, Scott, you're on the call, and you, I think, attend some of the architecture meetings. What are your thoughts about some of this, about the profiles and the reactive aspects?
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think we need to have core very lightweight, and it needs to be scrutinized with respect to the other types of extensions. Another extension that potentially has similar issues is the GraphQL. You know, that's still an in-progress thing, but potentially could have a lot of impact on you know, what you want to support in a given extension. And I mean, to the previous comment as to it becomes ambiguous to what MicroProfile is, I mean, I think that is part of the nature of a set of fluid specifications. I mean, it's not going to be something that you can easily draw a box around. I mean, that is.
I think. Yeah, go ahead.
What we wanted. We wanted the antithesis of Java EE.
I think we can still get that. The statement that I was saying, if there was zero overlap between the two boxes, then it truly is a forking of the brand. Doesn't mean anything at that moment.
Well, it does, because it's still a community that's developing specifications under a given modality. So I mean, the issue is that the people who are architects across different extensions need to have arguments for why, if there's a security aspect, why isn't it the JWT security?
Yeah, but it will take, for vendors like us, it will take too much work to support. If we wanted to provide support for MicroProfile, and then we need to divide so that our clients know there is a difference, then we need to add human capital. And that is a no, that is not scalable. So operationally,
there's no scalability issue.
Hold on, yeah.
I disagree.
So one of the things that when I talk to people about the MicroProfile, I try to communicate its value. I always give them, and they're like an architect in a company, I give them this speech. I say, one of the best things about the MicroProfile is it picks the best of breed standards and says, stop arguing about what you're going to do inside the company. You're going to use these standards. Now, the Java people will get a bonus because they're using because they can use MicroProfile and then go faster. But the other people who are writing in Go and whatever you want, they just need to implement the same standards and interact with the services using what is defined in the MicroProfile, painting the picture that we kind of talked about very early in the MicroProfile, which is there are really two aspects of it. One is that there's an architectural set of recommendations being made saying JWT is a part of your architecture and open tracing is a part of your architecture. And then we go above and beyond that and provide them Java bindings for these things so you can get off the ground quickly. So you don't have to re-implement these things. You get the implementations for free in Java. I can totally see the scenario where there is a core MicroProfile set of standards like JWT, like open tracing, like the health check stuff that we define clearly in terms of here's what it looks like on the wire. And then there is inside the JVM perspective of that standard. Currently, the inside the JVM perspective of that standard is very traditional blocking Java perspective, especially for, but we could have alternate perspectives of that standard, but we could all agree on that. We could all agree on the architectural perspective. So if someone's writing their service in using a reactive code inside their JVM, it doesn't matter because it still appears to the architecture in a way that's compatible. Did you understand what I'm saying? So like we could more clearly call out the architectural bucket that we say is MicroProfile compliant, right? You can have a MicroProfile compliant architecture by implementing these standards in your architecture. And we could even show a picture where there's one is the MicroProfile reactive extensions version of those. Here's Go, and they're doing these same standards in their own way. We don't help them in any way. We just simply say, you must implement these standards. Here's the Java blocking perspective of these standards. But there's a hub, and at the center is all the MicroProfile architectural decisions we've made that basically force all of the microservices in the architecture to bend to that will. And some of them who are doing them in Java can use the blocking way. Some of them who are doing them in Java can use the MicroProfile reactive extensions. And some of them who are doing it in Go and Node and other languages, well, they just need to implement the standards, and we have a document for them that says, here's what you have to do.
Right, but the architectural elements that apply are a function of the environment. So if you're looking at a service mesh environment that's based on OpenShift versus Knative versus Microsoft Azure, those elements have to be portable to that environment or else they're not core. So that is the issue. You have to be able to define what is a relevant set of core architectural principles that we have standardized in MicroProfile.
Yeah.
Scott, the thing is that we cannot throw.
I'm going to lose my thought if you start to keep talking.
Go ahead.
One of the things that I find super frustrating about standards, especially like the OAuth standard, is that you get a bunch of people together, they see so many different ways that things could be done, that they end up standardizing them all and not having any really strong recommendations. And then you go to learn this brand, this thing you heard about, which is so amazing, and everything is optional. You don't even know what to do at that moment because like all the grant types are optional, refresh tokens are optional, how long refresh tokens live for is optional, everything's optional in OAuth, and which is why it did nothing until like JDBT came along and started forming it up, and then it made specifications like OpenID Connect to try and give it some shape so it could actually be usable, because ultimately OAuth 2 ended up being just the everything is possible specification, which is basically not standardizing anything if you say everything is possible. So I mean, there is we can be too dangerous if we don't just have an opinion. At a certain point, we have to have an opinion that says do this.
And naturally, that never works. What I was going to say is, if a corporation wants to migrate and adapt MicroProfile, and we are so weak to be so compliant because we don't have a stand of a core, then it just goes to show that we cannot do even the bare minimum for them not to do so much homework. An architect or someone that is a chair of the IT department needs to decide that there are the minimum requirements for them to map up the skeleton of what it will take to go into MicroProfile and choose the value of adapting the project. This goal in MicroProfile is trying to deal with increasing adaptability. As it stands, neutrality means 0 to us. and we just need to decrease, my recommendation is to decrease the core, to go back and, remove all the blockers. We want reactive. There are many people using reactive. They have to comply with the core, not be a part of the core, and Santa Monica. And we move forward. I mean, let's stop being careful on the minutia. That's not our job, right?
Well, that's not clear. Again, the issue was not about not adopting anything. It's about adopting a core that's actually usable in the service mesh environments that we're advocating for MicroProfile.
I think that leads on to an interesting topic where a lot of people are monetizing by saying, we'll take this platform and run it in our service, and we'll monetize on, the kind of bureau running service. We've kind of got Prometheus and MicroProfile metrics as a sort of standard way of tying these two things together in a way. And we've got health, but a lot of these things are still kind of quite vendor specific, cloud specific. And you see, for example, when Oracle was talking about Helidon, they were using it as a kind of come to Helidon and then it will work better in the Oracle Cloud. Is there any, it's one of 2 points I had. The first point is there any value for us to kind of more push towards like an SPI for a mesh where, I implement the MicroProfile mesh SPI and my dashboard lit up, so instead of running it on some other framework, when I've got a MicroProfile app, I can put that in my cloud environment and it is instrumented and it's got all these kind of day two things. Or is that, I guess that's sort of in hand already because we use all these de facto standards like open tracing and metrics. Is there anything left there to do that isn't done?
Not really. We've kind of been testing the specs in Istio and Service Mesh as we go along. I think realistically, the work that comes out of that will result in it works, then we don't need to do anything.
A thing I was wondering about missing was if we go reactive and we use reactive back pressure to, stop servers sweating, then, we use this sort of the fact that a server is getting slow or using too much memory or CPU percent to do scaling. But if we have a sort of integrated reactive back pressure, that sort of prevents that stress. So then how do we use sort of ticket availability to do scaling? But maybe that's down a rabbit hole. And so the other topic I sort of related to that was to do that tweet I posted from Graham Rosher, where he's saying the libraries themselves need updating with this metadata, which simplifies greatly getting stuff working. And other people probably know more than me what he is referring to. But that looks to me like it's a value add for libraries that might standardize things a little bit, because Quarkus, Quarkus is sort of it's not in the fold, but Micronaut as well. They're kind of sort of splintering off. And have we got any value for them?
Well, like I said, I think the value that MicroProfile can offer to the entire industry is saying these are the architectural standards that we support, and you must support them too to talk to our services. And having a document that someone who is programming in Go can read, because their boss told them to. You have to implement these things in order to use your language here because this is our architectural standard, right? Doesn't necessarily have to say that it's a service mesh architecture or whatever, but if open tracing applies, it applies. If JWT applies, it applies. If the way you pull metrics out of a server applies, like, do you guys see where I'm going? I think there is a box that we need that's not on any of these, because all these boxes talk about Java.
Well, one of the things. Sorry.
Can I finish my point there? In that tweet that Graham Rosher was talking about, he's saying there's a standard way to feed things to Graal. Are we at all interested in running in a Graal environment going forwards? And if so, is there this notion that he's talking about where we want to add things into our, it can either be a profile or it could be something where each spec has some notion of this metadata? Or is it a different topic from growing pains?
I'm thinking it's kind of a different topic because you're getting more into an implementation of the specifications.
That is an architectural topic.
Yeah,
so I think of them as profiles, because I could see a MicroProfile profile that was for, Graal VM.
Extensions, Gordon. Extensions.
Okay. Well, I'll park it for now, and it may never come up.
No, Gordon, finish your sentence.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's probably best if I park it for now, because I don't think I don't think it's being caught, or in terms of it's not catching on.
Well, that's what I was saying. Just go ahead. You were about to make a good point before Amelia interrupted you, so I want to hear the rest of the point, because I think it was the one that was going to explain it all.
No pressure then. So I'm very interested in the idea of profiles being for the deployment environment. So, and I'm very interested in this trend towards more, well, to summarize it, the word Graal VM, Quarkus uses quite a lot of CDI and has quite a lot of MicroProfile type feel to it. Micronaut, maybe less so. And there's some stuff on Twitter where they're talking about perhaps they could have a standard extension mechanism, or it says, Java will benefit more if we stop building extensions to frameworks and simply make the libraries themselves compatible. So I'm not an expert, subject matter expert in making libraries compatible with their environment, but I think long term, if MicroProfile is for like microservices and sort of like, I know it means different things to different people, but there is a trend towards the Micronaut Quarkus way of looking at things. And I think profiles, it will come where it will be, Held and SE have done this as well, where people are going down into kind of more faster, smaller runtimes. And that's where I see the dimension of profiles splitting, not simply by functional area, but more by the deployment environment.
So I think that's an interesting way to parse. Sorry, I'm gonna step in. That's an interesting way to parse things I hadn't really thought of. The way I looked at profiles was a way to balance pulling in new implementations while maintaining some sense of application portability. And that's the one thing that we haven't really talked about as a part of this call. It's around application portability. And it's in the spec in a couple of places. I didn't dwell on it a whole lot, if I recall correctly. But I'd always looked at a profile as a way of saying, okay, if an implementation supports this extension, sorry, Amelia, supports this extension, then my app should run there, right? The interesting thing that I think Gordon brought up is more of a deployment, and maybe there's, well, more of a deployment way of slicing a profile, although that can also imply portability in some sense, perhaps. But anyway, I just thought I'd throw that out, is that I thought application portability is a key tenet of defining a profile, a key way to measure things, I guess. All right, I'm done.
So let me add something. Lionel, you have added yourself, and welcome to this call. You are an independent. Can you say hello and give us some feedback? We have someone here who is an independent, but there he is. Go ahead. We cannot hear you.
Whatever now. Can you hear me now? Hey.
Yes, go ahead, Lionel.
Hey, sorry. Hey, hi. I've been silently staring at the conversation, and I think that Gordon has a great point on the thing that we've been trying to fix everything for our language or for our environment, but in the end, there's always a general solution. In respect of that conversation, I don't really know about the different extensions of profiles and the solution that we can go, but I really think that we should think about this more broadly, like Gordon pointed out a couple of times that, and again, I don't know how to pin the term, and it's more about growl. Like, are we going to still be just Java thing, or are we thinking about more about microservices and how other microservices will also integrate with our platform, which is something very interesting. That will be my 2 cents, right?
There you go. What do we think about what Gordon just said?
Well, I think what I was trying to communicate earlier plays to what Gordon is talking about and plays what Lionel is also talking about, which is we're selling to people who don't have just one language. That doesn't exist anymore. So MicroProfile is taking an opinionated perspective of architectural standards, and we're solving them in Java, but ultimately our value primarily to the industry is the set of standards that we've picked and said, these are the ones that you have to implement in your architecture, whether it's a service mesh or whatever, and that's a valuable thing. I think we need to put them in a box and say, that's MicroProfile's architectural core, right? Whatever you want to label the box, I don't care. I just tried to come up with a name, but it doesn't matter. And there can be the reactive Java perspective on it. There can be a Graal perspective on it. There can be different lenses on those standards and different in your code APIs that you use to carry out those standards. But all the things that we create, they will interoperate together because they're using the same wire standards. And that's the reality that companies are living in, is that they have to choose the set of architectural standards, and then they're going to have 3/4 of the company use one language, and 1/4 of the company is always going to be the renegades and want to do things in a completely different language, and those microservices have to interact. Hold on. Yeah. When I'm done talking, Amelia, please don't be the first one to talk. So I do think that we need to better represent the fact that we have helped people by choosing these standards. And, we could have multiple lenses on those standards. We could have one that's more reactive. We could have one that fits better with GraalVM. And they could all be happening under the MicroProfile umbrella. As long as they can talk together, that's within the spirit of what we were trying to do.
So I find it interesting, the idea of having a different lens on the same thing. How that may get organized via profiles is a discussion to have. My gut is to not focus too much on Graal yet, because it's still in everyone's trying to figure it out mode, right? How do we do this kind of stuff? I think it's a little bit early. It would be interesting if others, could continue to go down that road and try things out and get different perspectives and so on. So that's just a Graal specific thing. The reactive thing is going to be, I think, a driving forcing function for how we think we're going to split up. Oh, sorry, I'm pointing at my screen. How we're going to split up these profile. Well, not split up. How do I say this? A major contributing discussion to defining profiles, I guess, whether it's a cross-cutting concern, a vertical concern, or whatever. All right.
Masking extensions?
Yeah, that too.
And the core?
Well, yeah, so like I say, I think what's going to happen is that we're missing your option 3, Matt. You're missing a box off to the left, right? And in that box is Open API, maybe not Open API. I mean, depends on how. But in the box is the is JWT, not MicroProfile JWT, but JWT.
Yes. Yes.
And
Open API.
Open tracing, the wire format for health check, and that's the architectural standards. Now you can have multiple implementations of those things for people who want to do stuff in Java versus people who want to do stuff in Graal versus people who want to do stuff in a reactive way. But we're agreeing on primarily that box off to the left. That's our guiding North Star.
Clearly, I am a +1 on this, if we diminish or revise the core.
We're not talking about the Java APIs for these things. We're talking about the standard itself.
Right.
That's box, right? That's our architectural standard.
That's a very good point, David. You know, that's something that we have not really promoted. I mean, each of the specs references these individual items, but we really haven't promoted that idea.
Right.
And we should be more upfront with that.
Exactly. And so I tried to communicate this when I said, when I talk about MicroProfile to people, I try to draw that box in their head. And then I say, here's the Java way to do it. Why'd you delete the box?
Yeah, but some people also say that we are just doing what already exists and we are not doing something new. So that's also a criticism. Okay, I can understand your point and it's a valid point, but not everyone sees it like that.
Because we haven't communicated it clearly.
I totally understand, but you know, if you're sitting inside a corporation, what happens is that they'll argue about which standard to choose. And if there are 10 standards and if there's going to be 2 competing standards for 5 different topics, that's a problem for companies because everyone will choose different flavors of these, and then one company's work does not interoperate with another company's work because they don't pick the same choices, right? And so the fact that we have an opinion is a piece of value that we're offering, and then we're investing in our opinion with the different implementations that also backs up our opinion.
Correct.
And so if we choose between the different architectural standards, as we have already done, right? And we back it up with the Java implementation, we back it up with reactive perspectives on those standards. So we're adding value behind our choices, and so that is value. Right?
But you know what I like about
there's only so much time left, and there was something that popped up in the last call, which was, can we test this in terms of our customer base? There's so many conversations I have about MicroProfile. I'm interested in the kind of the big banks, the big insurance companies, the people building apps, and I'm just a vendor monkey, you know. And I talk to people who talk to me, who talk to me, who talk to other people, who talk to me. And I saw recently there was a Lightbend survey where they were giving $1 to girls who code. And you've got a very good set of customer experiences, David, but my opinion isn't based on data. It's not based on what users are saying. I read what Kevin said, saying, well, you know, where's the data that says that users are getting too confused, or vendors who might come in decide not to because it's too big?
But we don't have the data because we have not been tracing it, but we know that our clients, when they are going to migrate or looking for support, they are always looking about not being asked to do the homework. That is just adding debt to them. That's a flat no. We're talking about adaptability of MicroProfile. By having the standards, the standard, David says is the standards. I really like that, even better than the core. That will be like the Vaseline. We will make it even easier for MicroProfile to be adaptable. And then we will do the service and all this stuff that isn't worked to do a better job. But it's just, we don't have the data. But we know.
Have some independent people here. So we have Lionel and Emerson. I don't know, but I will say, and Martin, or Martin. So I will say what I encounter very typically when I get into a customer's site. I encounter very typically that there will be, like I say, a big chunk of the company that all wants to do the same thing or is happy to do as they're told, and that will be like 3/4 of the company, and they may all choose Java. They may be doing Spring Boot. They may be doing Java EE, whatever. And then there's like 3/4 of the company or 1/4 of the company who they always want to be using whatever cool new anything exists, and they're going to change it. They're going to change their minds a ton of times. They're going to go for a while, then they're going to go this for a while. And the biggest need for these companies is for these two teams, these teams to be able to write services together. And
so what you're saying then is that it doesn't really matter in terms of the people who pick MicroProfile, how that's split up. It just has to concentrate on, or at least talk to standard industry ways that talk to other microservices that is outside of MicroProfile.
Exactly. And so
in a way, you're agreeing with Kevin in that you're not pointing to data that says there's a current problem.
I mean, I don't know what specific point of Kevin that I'm agreeing to, but I generally agree with Kevin a lot. So
it's in the margin just below. If someone was to scroll down a bit, who's sharing their screen.
Gordon, you think we have read the document? We have not even read the document. We will go to the document after this call. So.
The most valuable thing that we can do in terms of how we communicate with big companies, in my perspective, is right now we have Java implementations of all these standards, but we need to put them in a box and wrap them up in something that can be read and will be read by people who are not Java people, so they know how to interoperate with the stuff that we're doing, right? Yeah. So if I'm a CTO and I say we're adopting MicroProfile as our architectural standard, and I know that I'm enabling 3/4 of my company who's using Java, and now the 1/4 that isn't using Java, here's the thing you got to do for me so that I know you're going to interoperate with the architecture that I've chosen. And
I need to argue something there, and is that all these standards to me just look like a service mesh definition. So in my opinion, it's more we're defining some standards that we like, some opinions on how microservices should communicate. But remember that these specs are more, well, MicroProfile specs, what I've seen is more about how we develop stuff, not how the services interact. So that's also a point to be checking, like, do we want to create specs, programmatic specs, or do we want to give an opinion on how we merge together our services in a MicroProfile? And from what I see, it seems like we're defining a service mesh. Okay, a service mesh has open tracing that uses Prometheus, that uses WT. So in the end, what are we defining here? Are we defining standards for the architecture of microservices, or are we defining standards for how we're going to program these microservices and how they're going to be developed for the developer?
Yeah, the answer to that one is we're 100% defining standard. For a typical environment, it's 100% in selecting the standard and 75% doing the Java version of it. And the reality is that most big companies will choose will choose a language, and 3/4 of the company will speak MicroProfile JWT because that's what they're referring to the Java version of it because that's what they're writing every day. But we need to enable those people to talk to the Go people who aren't.
So there's no inter-technology standard for reactive back pressure between servers. I mean, the nearest thing might be something based on Netty or RSocket or something like that, but there is no Go to Java to Lightbend protocol that does back pressure.
I apologize, everyone. I'm gonna just interrupt. We're 5 minutes over. I'm okay going long, but one thing I do want to kind of as an outcome of this meeting is to define. Well, I was trying to set a stake in the ground for having this all figured out by MicroProfile 3, so June.
It's not going to happen.
I think it could happen.
Listen to this.
So the question, hold on, I'm not done yet.
Okay.
Sorry,
Go.
I put on my David hat there for a second. I apologize.
Yeah, go ahead.
So my question is, should we continue to have this meeting on a bi-weekly basis on the off weeks?
Yes.
Except for the architecture meeting, right? Uses this time slot once a month. And maybe we can continue this there. I don't know. Or should we? Is every other week enough?
No. So
in MicroProfile 3.
So listen. So this is my recommendation, and why, John, I was on the sales staff. But thank goodness you're an awesome police. Let's schedule it for the 23rd, because I think that will be enough. Let's tweet. Internally we will push via the media to get more traction, so that those not in this call will watch the video and get involved. And though we will have, let's add you need to send the minutes and say soft deadline to get something figured out before MicroProfile 3. But it's like a soft deadline, and we will schedule it because we will meet next week. After the 23rd, we will decide. The problem is that for those of us that are traveling in May, it's going to be hard to make those calls. What happens is, how much work can it be done through the document? And we need to populate the document with today's call. So in the next, we need to set up some deadlines and homework for the people here. And also internally say, push for the ones not in this call to add value to the freaking documents. That would be my recommendation. And I'm not okay with going farther on this call today. I actually prefer it to end on time, so we're disciplined with the scheduling of the call and future calls.
I agree that we should close it down today, but I would be in favor of it. Let's do it every other week.
Mm-hmm.
Agreed.
Yeah, me too. +1 on that one, but
Okay, so I will schedule a repeating meeting, I don't know, through June, mid-June or something. On the off weeks, we'll have to figure out the architecture meeting overlap. Ken, I'll talk to that offline to see what we want to do there. And then send out some kind of meeting minutes as well.
Mm-hmm. So then if you do that, I will sending an issue and setting this up as a recurring meeting via Twitter so that the team can do that. And then we will have more awareness of this call. But I just need to know the exact dates and the Zoom link and all the data, and we'll move forward.
Most of the time. So just a second. Rudy brought up a good point on the chat. And if we tweet this out and get a lot of people that are only semi-interested in MicroProfile, we're going to get a ton of opinions, and we're never going to come to a conclusion.
Well, plus people that aren't necessarily attending all the live hangouts or aren't quite as active, I think.
Yep. They don't have a skin in the game.
So I agree. More opinions are good, and you need to know all the opinions to have a good idea of what is living in the community. But if you say, we'll make an agreement with 100 people, that's not possible.
We will never do that because we are not that type of project. But we welcome, and I don't agree on not having it open. I believe in pushing it and working in the open. Because if someone shows up, they have a value, and it doesn't mean that they are correct. We are not correct, but we need to hear their voices. I'm always for transparency, especially in open source.
We make an agreement right now between us. We're not trying to go to perfection as our next step. We know where we are. We want to have at least a better step forward for 3. It doesn't have to be the last step. We can have a 4 that has a totally different, more involved perspective. So right now we got kind of a bigger core and a few specs that float off to the side. Do we want, what is a better next step from where we are? That's kind of really what we're trying to solve. Not as what is the perfect thing that we can end on, but based upon where we are, what is a good next step? Yeah, and we just need to make sure that we are not thinking of it as the last step, because if we think of it as the last step, we will be worried about it being forever, and we know that's not the way the MicroProfile works. We are happy to make an interim step to get forward, knowing we can take more steps.
Yep.
Yeah, okay. So do we agree that we will push this and be transparent? If we are not going to push it and be transparent, I'm not going to be joining the next calls because it's irrelevant to me, and it seems that we're weak to not be able to handle it.
Be careful when you're bargaining.
Yeah,
no,
yeah.
I'm just saying. I'm not marketing. I'm operations.
Our mission statement.
I just don't like. Yeah, go ahead.
Our mission statement, based upon what John carved out, is what do we do for 3? Can we improve the way we communicate to the world about what we're doing for 3? Specifically, as an implementer, what do I have to do in our perspective of 3?
Can we ask?
Go ahead.
Can we ask Kumulu Z? Is that how you pronounce it? Because they're the most sort of recent entrant.
Yes.
So they're the most recent. They're the people who've had to eat the biggest elephant from scratch. Does anyone know somebody in that environment, or
I do.
Fujitsu, what's it called? Fujitsu, is it Fujitsu Foundation or Fujitsu?
Did they have an implementation?
Yeah, they do. They do. It pops up.
Yeah. So Gordon, add me as those as my task. I know them, and I have been pulling them into these calls. So yes, I can own the task to say let's join because they are interested.
The issue with what's a challenge for Fujitsu is these meetings are in a really terrible time for them. And that's the same challenge for Lightbend, right?
But actually, Kenji and Mike D are joining the MicroProfile Hangouts more often than not after they got pulled, and so is Matt.
And that doesn't mean that we can't invite them, but it just means that there's very low likelihood that they'll be able to attend. So at a certain point, we do need to have list communication so that we can enable people in different time zones. So meetings are great. Our mission statement needs to get carved out. I like the picture that John drew. I would probably put that standards box into option 2, at least in terms of a guaranteed that we can agree on next step. Because we have is it number 2 that we have now? John, you want to scroll up?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Yeah, I would put that architectural standards box in number 2. We all agree with it, that we're there, right? That's what we have now.
Yeah, I think more or less.
Yes.
I mean, not in practice, but I think in philosophy.
Yeah.
More so in
So
philosophy.
can we end this call, guys? It's going long.
We'll end the call, and our mission statement is: can we improve this for 3? Is there some way to improve this for 3?
And we will, and I will agree that we're going to push this like we will do any other talk. And we will, social responsibility requires that we freaking on it. And those ones that join, like Lionel and others, it's so valuable. We will not comply with 100. We need to be less compliant and much more aggressive on how we do stuff. And I don't believe in quiet it down. I detest anything that will not enable someone interested to join. So FYI, this is what we're going to do. I will file an issue, and this will be a recurring tweets.
So, John, the picture with number 2, if you're going to add, the picture of what you have for number 2 needs to be brought to the top of the document as like where we are loosely. And feel free to put little dotted lines around platform core if you want, but that's loosely where we are. So if we add the architectural standards, it would be a new thing. So, I think it's good to capture what we have, like where we think we are. Because the mission statement is how to improve where we are. So if we don't have a picture of where we are, we're never going to get agreement.
All right. I took a bunch of notes off to the side. I hope somebody's been capturing some notes in the live hangout, because there was lots of good discussion today. I will post this meeting up to the YouTube channel, and make a note in the Google group thread, right, pointing to the video and the meeting minutes. And I think that from my perspective, I'll end it there.
Sounds wonderful. Thank you so much for the documents. I was so impressed with the colors. I actually really loved it. Now I can consume. I love it.
Okay.
Thanks, John.
All right. Thanks everyone. All right.
Everyone.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, bye.
Thank
Awesome.
you. Bye.
Awesome. Bye, everyone.
about our technology because at that point I had an Atari home,